Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. This is a one-on-one interview. I am joined by Chris Wheeler, the Manchester United correspondent for the Daily Mail and the Mail. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Joe. How are you? Okay?
I'm very good, thank you. We've got loads of questions to ask you, loads going on. So we've got all this new ownership stuff. We'll be getting into that. The transfers in the summer. What's going on with Old Trafford? Just loads of stuff going on. Let's start off with some of this Old Trafford stuff before we get into those transfers and potential targets. There's a piece just general reporting of the last couple of weeks of this Ratcliffe, his intention to sort of transform Old Trafford, whether that be a new Old Trafford, if that even makes sense as a phrase, or redeveloping and restructuring the current Old Trafford to bring it into the modern sort of footballing world. The Wembley of the North was mentioned. What's your understanding of not necessarily the odds of one or the other, but just what Ineos are looking at, and also, if you do know this, obviously it's a slightly peculiar one, why the bloke that only owns a quarter of Man United seems to be spearheading this off-field, non-footballing matter that is the football stadium, when he's only meant to be running the football side, and the people that own the other 75% or the voting rights seem to be doing nothing. How is this dynamic working like this?
A lot of questions there. Okay. Fine. I think first and foremost, what's interesting about the last couple of weeks, Joe, is there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about the stadium, Wembley of the North, and it's a great hook, it's a great line. Fundamentally, nothing's actually changed. I mean, you're still looking at three, I would say two, because the third option for me is not really an option. That's to move away from the current site. Yep. I think most fans wouldn't even entertain that thought. So you're looking at two options, which is, do you develop Old Trafford into something bigger and better, or do you build next door and knock it down? And it's a really interesting and difficult question, this, because it's a real head and heart matter. I think so many fans would hate to see the current stadium knocked to the ground, and the history and the memories that go with it. Yeah. Even though you're building next door, you're still losing that, and that's what Tottenham have done, of course. And then I'm sure there's many more fans who say, well, no, we have to move on. We have to think to the future. The revenue and the type of stadium you get by knocking down and starting again is too good to go and turn down. So that's where we're at. And obviously it seems as though Jim Ratcliffe's 71 years old. He's in a hurry. He wants to. He's got a whole year waiting to go and see this thing go through. He wants to get cracking. He wants to get things done. Yep. And I can see that. And so there will have to be a decision made, both in terms of the financial and the business side of it, but also, of course, the history and the kind of emotional pull of it all to what you do next. Now, it's not, you're talking about £2 billion for a completely new stadium.
That seems like twice as much as the next most expensive recent big stadium. Why is it so much?
That's the figure that's been put on it.
Yeah.
I
know you're not in the concrete and steel
that's
business.
That's what they're saying is about £2 billion to build the kind of stadium that they would want next door. Now, that isn't to say that Plan B, or the other plan, as it were, is cheap. It's... People would say, and I know the phrase has been used about, that you're throwing good money after bad. The other people I interviewed last week as part of this, I interviewed, Gary Pallister, Lou Macari, Sammy Mack, and Lou was saying he did the tour recently and he absolutely loved the stadium. He said, if this isn't a stadium that has to be pulled down. And it was interesting, David Gill actually talking to Rio Ferdinand the other day, made a very interesting point. He said, the roof leaked back then as well, He said, it's just because things were going well, and the focus was on the pitch and on the team and winning trophies. The roof still leaked then. And it's funny how when things go badly, people jump on, the bad stuff. But I think that, I'd be interested to see whether they could do what they've done at Barcelona and at Madrid to take an iconic old stadium and basically kind of refurbish it, renovate it. So you're keeping the history, but you're also updating it. And that way probably is a way that wasn't always available in the past. It was either you keep it, you get some new carpets and a bit of paint, and then you go again, or you build a new stadium. Now, this idea of putting a kind of shell round, putting a roof over, talking to the people close to this, they say, look, this won't be cheap either, this will be really, really expensive too. You can't just stick a roof over Old Trafford and go, it's cheap. It's not. And equally, Old Trafford, you still have that problem of the South Stand.
Yeah.
If you're going to put a shell around Old Trafford and do that kind of job on it as they've done at the Bernabeu, that whole South Stand issue, that whole railway track at the back, the housing at the back, you can't just do that. So whatever plan you go into, if you try and keep the current Old Trafford, it's very difficult with that South Stand there. So what happens? Anyone knows now, but clearly Jim Ratcliffe wants to move on with that. To answer your second or third question, it is, I mean, when we spoke last year, we talked, didn't we, about the whole investment thing with Jim Ratcliffe and the Glazers. How does it work out? What's the dynamic? How is this going to happen? You know, how do you get one guy owning a quarter, a family owning the best part of 3/4? They are the dominant owners. So how does, first of all, the football side of things work? And it was interesting, actually, wasn't it, when very quickly after Jim Ratcliffe became active at the club, they said, this idea of which going to keep business and football separate isn't going to work.
No.
Go figure. I mean, of course it was never going to work. It's one of the world's biggest football clubs. Yeah. How did they ever think they were going to keep business and football separate?
They literally couldn't be more intertwined if you tried, could they? One thing is completely reliant on the other and vice versa. But since then they did sort of say, actually, rather than it being, because my concern was he'd come in, he'd pledge the money, and then we'd have this obvious sort of butting of heads or, sort of mixing of ideas where we ended up with, the Glazers have said, actually, we're going to have more of an eye on the football side than we originally thought. That was my concern. But actually, it seems to have gone the other way, where they've gone, actually, Ineos are going to have more of a hand in the non-footballing stuff than we thought, which to me is music to my ears, really. But do you think that's why, like I said, sorry, my sort of three-part question, but that's why we are seeing Ineos seemingly leading the way on this new or revamped Old Trafford situation, because actually they're going, the infrastructure isn't football, the pitch, the stadium doesn't play games, but it's where the games take place, it's where the fans, of course they're linked.
Those two things are completely interlinked, and I think you've got the Glazers doing what they do where they are, and you've now got a very strong Ineos team on the ground, Dave Brailsford and the rest of them, looking at what's going on. You've got Barada coming in, of course, he's going to be their man. And so, Ineos having a real say in what's going on. But I think the interesting thing, going back to the details of the buyout or the buy-in, what you want to go and call it, was this line about that the Glazers can sell to a higher bidder after 18 months. So, okay, then what happens if Jim Ratcliffe leads the way on this super new stadium or doing up the old ground into looking far better, and there's going to be millions and billions? What then happens if he's doing that? Who funds that? Whose pot does that come out of? Out of Ineos and the Glazers. And if it's an Ineos-led thing, then what happens in 18 months' time if indeed the Glazers do get a high bid that Ratcliffe can't or won't match, and he's forced to sell?
He does have the option to match it, doesn't he?
He can match it, but what says it's so high that he can't or won't, Then what happens if he's got his kind of fingers in so many pies at the club? How do you extricate Ineos and Ratcliffe from that? It's an interesting one because, as I say, since the beginning, the dynamic of how this works out was always a question. It's moved as we've gone along even. And then what happens in the future if Ineos and Jim Ratcliffe lead the way on the new stadium and Carrington maybe a whole different training ground? If indeed he then has to go and sell up and get out in 18 months' time or beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I would maybe look at any redevelopment and investment as sort of a sign that he isn't looking to step back, and if anything, looking to take more of anything. But like you said, it is possible that someone offers twice what Ratcliffe did, and Ratcliffe can't match it. But hopefully, that's not the case.
I mean, that's the plan, and that's the hope that he's in it for the long haul, and this is all going forward. It's positive, but there is this kind of like worrying clause within this whole deal that he might be forced to go and sell, and people close to it say, look, I mean, obviously there's no way he would fund or part fund a brand new stadium without having clauses in place that if he then got, forced out, he would get his money back, whatever. But it was always going to be the slightly messy side of this arrangement, not having one sole owner or one guy in charge was always going to cause some some like question marks going forward.
And you've seen as well with Chelsea's plans for either a new stadium or redeveloping Stamford Bridge, they've all been sort of shelved now, haven't they, with what happened with Abramovich and the sort of turmoil and Todd Burley and Clear Lake coming in. They were meant to be getting this new shell on Stamford Bridge, more seats, all that, and that's just been sort of, parked for who knows how long. It is interesting, the stadium stuff, in it. Like you said, the South Stand is always going to be that tricky thing of, do you go up and over the railway? Do you sort of have to build it steep? And who knows how they'd manage that? And but I do think that, Jay, obviously, who works on the Channel Zero all the time, he's quite keen on a new stadium. I think some people like to paint it as, the people who go to the games, they go to the stadium, they want to keep Old Trafford, and then everyone else is like, let's get a new stadium. But Jay goes and has gone, most weeks for the last 30 years, and he just thinks, just get a new one, best in class, start from the bottom, rather than trying to sort of retrofit Old Trafford and maybe sort of mixing and matching of styles and sort of, how popular and how new things are. So who knows? Just speaking of how new things are, someone that's been an absolute revelation this season is Mainoo. And you wrote an article recently talking about him being rewarded with a new contract, and by the sounds of it, he's still on his academy contract, isn't he?
Yeah.
Do you know any more details on that, sort of how much is Ineos involved in this? Are we looking at matching this? Because Garnacho had a similar situation, didn't he?
Garnacho, Greenwood, Rashford. I looked at all of those when doing the story. I went to the club and said, it's fair to say. I went, I don't think there's any rush. I think they're keen not to be seen to, just because he has, a handful of good games, you can say more than a handful to be fair, but just because he's had a kind of half a season, they don't fall over themselves to do these things. But it's absolutely in keeping with the club's policy, with their younger players who've come through the same kind of route, then absolutely, he would be looking at getting improved terms end of the season. The club, his people, no one's driving this, no one's pushing it hard. I think everybody accepts that it's completely understandable and acceptable that come the end of the season, given how he's played this season and given what a huge future he clearly has, that he should be getting more money come the summer. And also my colleague Matt Hughes wrote today about the issue, of course, internationally. You've got Cobby with England and Ghana. There's been similar things in the past. Like Greenwood and Jamaica came up. I think Declan Rice and Ireland, of course, he'd played for Ireland. So it was, I'd be surprised if he didn't go with England. I think from his a playing career point of view, from the commercial point of view, the kind of spin-offs of being an England player rather than a Ghana player are clear. And of course, we've seen in the last few weeks the issues that have kicked up around the Africa Cup of Nations, Andre Onana going away with Cameroon, what's that's kind of caused. That's not something I'm sure that Mainoo and the club really want to be, kind of having every few years.
Yeah. Is it? So do you know? Is it both of his parents that are Ghanaian? Because I know that.
I don't know actually. No.
Yeah. Because he's from Stockport, isn't he?
Yeah. I think it's his father's Ghanaian. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, but I don't know. But yeah.
And he's played for England academy at younger levels as well, hasn't he? So that's been there's been
nothing really that's been. That's dragged him that way towards Ghana so far. Yeah. And it would just, I just think from a young player's point of view, it makes absolute sense that he goes and plays for England.
I honestly think that there's a not tiny chance that he goes to the Euros this summer. You look at the midfield; it's probably the thinnest of all the sort of areas. Yeah. And you think after, so who are the dead certs? Rice, Bellingham is a dead cert. Yeah. I think Calvin Phillips is 50-50 depending on how West Ham goes.
Henderson's drifted.
I think Henderson's 50-50. I mean, why not put Mainoo as 50-50? I think he would be very good. A midfield of Bellingham, Rice and Mainoo. Yeah. It's got a lot of balance to it, a lot of sort of composure. To say the average age is about 21. It's an incredibly well-balanced midfield, but hopefully we'll see.
I mean, even though Cobby didn't make his actual full debut in the league until Everton, wasn't it? Earlier this season. I mean, if you look at his game time now, compare that to Calvin Phillips, at both City and West Ham, and you compare it to Henderson playing in Saudi Arabia. Who would you want, out there? At the moment, I'd say it's going to. I'd be backing Cobby Mainoo.
Yeah, me too. Just moving on a little bit, then another sort of obviously academy product, but he's far more than that now. Marcus Rashford, in terms of his profile and his impact on United and who he is as a sporting face of Britain. He's not just a little United Academy player. He's one of the biggest names in British football, and it's been a very up and down season for him. You wrote a little bit about this sort of night or couple of nights out he had in Belfast, depending on what you believe and what you read, and how the club were approaching that. For you now, is that matter dealt with? There was talk of potential offer of counselling for him if that was something that was deemed necessary. Do you know any more on that? Do you know whether that's been taken up? Do you know what the next sort of steps for Rashford are following that, or is it sort of deal? It's done now. Put it behind us. Let's move on.
Yeah, and obviously on all these things, got to be a little bit careful with what we say, and of course with what I had to write. And I wrote the story about the counselling being there for him, and there was some pushback on that because people said, well, he's a 26-year-old guy, he's got the world at his feet. He's gone out, okay, he's had a night out. How can you need counselling for like one night out? That's insane. I take the point. But within that story, there was a line that I know absolutely right, that the club have been concerned about Marcus Rashford, for a little while now. We can't, say too much about that, but that I think speaks for itself. And the fact that you have that line, the fact that, that the club would provide counselling probably gives you an insight into, if this maybe wasn't the first time. We all know about the trip to China White for his birthday after the derby this season. But can't say too much more than that at this stage, other than the fact that there has been concern, there's been an awareness of Marcus for a while now. And this, as I say, wasn't the first transgression. All of us know that, but I think if there's anything positive that can come out of this now, Joe, it's that it's out there, and he knows it's out there now. And if this is a kind of spur, a catalyst to him not doing this again, to him realising that at 26, being who he is, what he is, you can't do this kind of thing. Then it's a good thing, then it is a good thing, and hopefully it is the end of it. Hopefully we draw a line, we move on. He's been caught out, he's been punished, he's gone back into the squad, he's playing really well again. Let's hope this is the end of it and we go and move on. And what came out, in the last few weeks was the reason why, and that's looking at it in a positive way, and we won't need to come back to it again in the future.
I hope so. I do think it's easy to underestimate, I think, when people look at footballers, they think perfect life, couldn't ask for anything more. But there are certain sacrifices you have to make as a footballer, a lot of sacrifices, like, you don't get a lot of sort of free time to go out and to party, and up until the point you retire, really, you shouldn't be doing much of that at all. You make a lot of money, but you get a lot of criticism, you get a lot of public scrutiny. The fame that comes with that, you can't really just go and sort of walk around Wilko and pick up a few bits, because you'll get mobbed and people will be after you and people will be trying to spin stories. So there are sacrifices that come with being a footballer, and it's not all just dead easy. But I think, most people or anyone really would make those sacrifices, and I think he has. That's the expectation. It's, you can't just go out when you want to before training. I think obviously, hopefully, he realised that. But when you look at Rashford this season, I've said this even before this stuff came out, and this isn't, I'm no psychologist by any means, but you just look at him, he looks pissed off. Like, he looks annoyed and deflated, and you're not watching a bloke who looks happy. No. And that's been almost all season. Even now, I think, against Wolves in the first, obviously that was last week, certainly the first half, United were playing brilliantly. But there were times where I just look at Rashford and think, it's like, he looks sort of exacerbated and annoyed. Do you think there's a potential sort of, I don't even know what the word would be, almost just sort of long-term fatigue with playing for a club that is so heavily scrutinised, and it recently hasn't had the sort of trophies to kind of offset how much scrutiny you're under? Do you think he's a bit sick of it almost? Or
I do think he's a kind of quite a contrary character. I think you talk to people close to him, close to the club, and nobody can really properly explain what this is about his body language. For years now, people have been saying, what's eating this guy? What's up with this guy? He's playing for Man United, his hometown team. He's earning a fortune, scoring goals. He's got he's living the dream. And yet you see him so much of the time, and he seems to have the weight of the world on his shoulders. And I think there is a fundamental shyness there. I think he is quite a shy guy. It was interesting going back to the Belfast issue and some of the comments that came out from the waitress who spoke to the papers about that. She said, she painted this picture of a guy who had the two, diamond encrusted watches on each wrist. He had all the bling, all the money in the world, said, and yet he couldn't quite carry it off. As a person, he seemed to be not quite comfortable in his own skin. I thought that was actually quite perceptive, and that seems to be the Marcus Rashford that we see so often. Is, in so many ways he ticks the boxes of this kind of football superstar. Yeah, I think as a human being, I think he is fundamentally quite shy. Yeah. And I think he does, from talking to people that have been close to him, they say he does wear his heart on his sleeve. He's one of these people that can't hide how he feels. He has to show it. And but then again, that begs the question, well, why would you be unhappy? For so long. He just seems to, I don't know, he just seems to be a bit miserable. He got the new contract, he's staying at his hometown team. Hopefully now they start something really, really exciting, and he's 26, prime of his life, prime of his football career. Why would you not be happy? But for some reason, he just seems to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yeah,
and also there's obviously tons of hours of his day and his life that we don't see, that we don't know what's going on. So, hopefully I think the best form he's had this season has been in the last month, which is a good thing for United. Even slightly before the Belfast stuff, he'd just started getting a couple of goals again, and hopefully we can see him push on and sort of lead that front line. I know he's not in the middle, but he's by far the most experienced, by far the most sort of goal-scoring player in that line, and he can be a leader and someone that Højlund and Garnacho can look up to, maybe.
I hope so, I hope so. I mean, he's, it seems to work well, him staying left, Garnacho going down to the right now. So, that seems to be going well. But I think let's go back to your point there, Joe. I mean, a colleague of mine wrote a piece recently about Lingard. And again, this is a very, quite a divisive issue, because some fans obviously, have maybe turned against him slightly. But the crux of the piece that he wrote, and where it pertains to someone like Marcus Rashford, is that we almost kind of expect our football heroes to do what we want them to do, if that makes sense. Like you said before, they're just human beings, and ultimately they have got the right, if they want to, just to go and sack it off and go to something else. And was it the right move for Jesse to go to Nottingham Forest? I don't think so. He'd gone to West Ham. Now he's in FC Seoul. I mean, it just feels like he's gone the wrong route. But the point of the piece, and the point I'm trying to make here, is we expect them to live out our dreams for us. What we say is, if I was you, if I had your pace,
people would bite your hand off
I
for
would
this,
give my right arm to play for Man United and be doing that. And I'd play till I was 35 or 45, as long as they'll ever have me. But that's us. And if you're actually in those shoes, and that's you, like you say, as a human being, you've got a right to live your life and go to Wilco. And if you want to sack it off in your mid-20s or 31, which was just, then and go and play in South Korea, then so be it, But ultimately, it's their choice. But, back to the point. Hopefully, Marcus now, he's back on point, he's playing well, and he can be an example for the young players of the club.
Yeah, I hope so. Right, let's get into some transfers then, because this is
transfers in February. Okay,
stuff. Well, the thing is, we don't have any transfers in January, so I'm just pushing it along a month. We were allowed transfers then, and they didn't
not so well known February transfer window.
Yeah, it's my favourite one. Yeah. Well, the thing is, we've already seen, and we'll just talk about it now. We've already seen City basically not announcing a transfer, but a deal has been done, and it's February. Yeah. I think Savio, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, and the reason this links to United, we'll get to in just a minute, but they've made this deal with Troyes or Troy or however you pronounce it, which are a second division French team, to sign Savio, who I believe is a 20-year-old or 21-year-old Brazilian attacker, forward, winger. Now, coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, Troy is owned to a large extent by the same City group that City are owned by.
Who would have thought
Who would have thought it? Now, he's gone there, and obviously he's a very highly rated talent. He's had loans at PSV, he's had loans at Girona this season. He's never played a game for him. So this great player that they managed to get in somehow hasn't, he's so good, he's playing for the team that's challenging to win La Liga, yet he's not good enough to play for this second division French team. Has now been the deal has been put in place for him to go to Manchester City. We can all see through it. We know obviously that those links are there, and that's either greased the wheels or maybe was the reason for the wheels in the first place. That he might have been bought by them for the sole intention of getting him to Man City one day. That might have been, who knows. But to bring it back to Man United, we've got an owner now, or a partial owner in Ineos and Jim Ratcliffe, who also own Nice. Now they've had a good season so far. I think they're second in the French league, doing very well. A couple of players that United have been linked with from them, Todibo being one, Thuram another. Do you think that this loophole, if you want to call it that, could be and will be exploited by United this summer? And do you see Todibo in particular being an option, and maybe sort of on one side exploiting a loophole, but on the other side being slightly creative with how we managed to bring players in, which is something you certainly couldn't accuse United of being over the last sort of 20 years or so?
Definitely not. Obviously he's a name that's been knocked around, and I think come the summer, centre-back is one area that they will look to go and strengthen in. I think clearly there's a question mark over the future of Varane. I'd be surprised if both Lindelof and Maguire stayed. I think maybe one of those might be on their way. Harry's had a great season in the circumstances, how it all began for him. Losing the captaincy, pretty much offered up to West Ham, was one foot out the door. Fair play to him, he stuck with it, he's come good again. Great performance, of course, on Sunday. Lindelof, been injured, come back, he is what he is. Yeah. But I think Varane will go the way it's looking now, and possibly I think one of Maguire or Lindelof could go. But I think they'll certainly be in the market for centre-back. Evans, of course, as well, 35 years old. Done great when he's come in, but is that the future for the club? Probably not. I think at least one centre-back, and he's a name that's been used. To go back to your point, Joe, about Nice and foreign clubs. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in some respects, the whole dual ownership in one way causes a problem, because there's a whole Champions League thing, and what happens if, and then you've got to clear all of those hurdles. But yeah, it does open up, this idea, the way that City have done it, the City Football Group, as they call themselves, quite sinister. Yeah, they this kind of worldwide network of clubs. Don't hold it against me, but I was on tour with City, and I think it was when, I can't remember now, under Pellegrini, about 2015 probably, when they were in the States, and they signed Frank Lampard for New York City FC. We were over in Brooklyn actually for his press conference when he first signed for the New York club, and by the end of that tour, of course, he'd been dragged over to come and sign for Man City themselves. So it happened. And who was the guy? Was it? I can't remember his name now. Is it Adrian Moy? Was he in Australia and he came over? And there was all of that. Aaron Moy, sorry, yeah. And there was an issue there, wasn't there? But where some of the Aussie clubs kicked up because City had used Melbourne to kind of circumnavigate certain rules. So it's not the first time that they've done this. If it's legal, and I presume it is, then fair play to them.
I mean, even if it's not, they might give it a go. Well, who knows? If you believe the charges,
make it one more charge on top of that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, just add one more. What the hell? But yeah, if that's okay, then yeah, fair enough. Is it something that Man United could do? Yeah, absolutely. It would make sense that if you have that route, that outlet, where the part owners of your club own other clubs, if you can use that, particularly in this day and age, post-Brexit, there are issues about paperwork. FFP now, there's issues for the first time for Man United. We're kind of looking at a real tight budget now, and that hasn't happened before. So if they can use anything like this to get around this and get some players in, happy days.
You mentioned their centre back, maybe one, maybe two. If we let two go, we might well need to. What other positions do you think United are going to be looking at in the summer? Because to me, it's a strange thing where if you look at in the sort of centre forward spot. I know Martial's still at the club, but essentially we've got one striker and he's 21. If you look in midfield, the main starting centre midfield is Casemiro in that deeper area. He's 32 now. You look at centre back, one of the main starters is Varane, who's, like you said, probably going to leave. We've got crucial players in every area, either missing or past their best. I think it could be a summer with quite a few ins and outs, personally.
Yeah, and of course it's already started, hasn't it? Because I think you've seen in January an awful lot of outs, which clear room on the wage bill, but also clear spots in the squad. So I think you've seen a real focus in January to get players out, mainly on loan deals, but a lot of them with views to buy. So I think Hannibal and Pellistri could easily go
Donny van de Beek, another one.
Permanence. I mean, I can't believe that he'll come back. Surely not. No. So he will be gone. Every chance that Hannibal goes, Pellistri goes. So quite a few slots opening up there. Like you say, Martial's still being paid. He's on the books. he's obviously going. So striker is the one that stands out. I think Højlund has had to share a lot, or shoulder too much of the burden this season. I think he was expecting too much of him. 20 years old, just turned 21, to be coming in with that kind of price tag, and to carry a club like Manchester United in attack was a hell of an ask, particularly given the people that were meant to be helping him haven't done. And so he's done well, really well of late. Obviously, the kind of run that he's on right now. But he needs help, obviously, and Manchester United cannot go with one striker. You need more than that. Even in this modern age. I know people like Andy Cole talk about 99 and 4 strikers and all the rest of it. That doesn't happen these days, but you need at least 2, obviously. I think striker is the one that we absolutely have to get. I think in the wide areas it's okay. Obviously, question marks about Greenwood. What happens next? Does Ballisti come back? What happens to Ahmad? But
Sancho
I think
as well. Obviously,
Sancho's coming back. I think there'll be a lot of interest in the wide areas. Not so much about new signings, but about whether existing players come back. But I think up front the striker is the main one.
Yeah.
As we've discussed, I think centre back they'll need at least one. Right back's going to be an issue. I'd be surprised if Wan-Bissaka stayed beyond the summer. I think because of the contract issue there, he didn't get the new contract that he was hoping for, that he was expecting. I think they would listen to offers for him. I think he could be on his way. So maybe a right back coming in. And centre mid. I think the Casemiro thing's very interesting, isn't it? Because last season it was a fantastic deal. Everybody was raving about him, quite rightly so. They overlooked the price tag given the age. They overlooked the wages. It's a 5-year deal as well, or 4+1. So it's clearly not a deal that's aged well. He was injured for much of this season, did his hamstring quite badly, out for 3 months. I think him and Martinez coming back in again have been huge. I always thought that. I thought those two coming back in again would be huge, and they have been. Sadly, of course, Martinez out again with his knee. Casemiro, though, he's doing okay. He's not as fit as he should be. He's not as mobile as he could be. But he's still doing a great job, and I think his know-how in that midfield is fantastic for Kobbie Mainoo. I think he's still, with him and Martinez coming back in again, have been a massive reason for what's happened this past month or so. But I do think that clearly Ineos are looking now at the contracts. It's his wife Varane, hasn't got the extension. Martial definitely not. But Casemiro too. I think there's a reason why John Murtough was out in Saudi in December. There was talk of both Varane and Casemiro going to Saudi. If not in January, it didn't happen, of course, in the summer. But again, I think Ineos looking very closely now at those kind of deals and saying that we can't do this. In this day and age of FFP, we cannot, have players on that kind of money, age 30 plus.
And also, you think I know Varane was 28 when we bought him, so that's slightly different. But Casemiro, for me, as a player, is great. Last season, he was excellent. But as a deal, it was clearly born out of frustration and desperation at the lack of a Frenkie de Jong, in the squad. We'd lost our first opening games embarrassingly, so we scrambled and we got Casemiro and we got Antony. I think we overpaid for both. I certainly think we overpaid for Antony. Casemiro, 60 million for one of the best defensive midfielders of his generation. You can justify a little bit more, but the 5-year deal for a 30-year-old is silly stuff, really, isn't it? Just from a deal perspective, I think the transfer of him as a player was very good, but again, it clearly wasn't who we wanted. We clearly overpaid in terms of wages. The contract was too long. There's rumours and reports last season of Jim Ratcliffe mentioning that deal in particular as one that he thought was silly. And, like I said, I like Casemiro as a player. I think he's very good, much better when he plays. But the deal was... It looked amateurish to me. It looked a little bit last day of the transfer window. I'm playing FIFA. I just might as well blow the whole budget on this guy because we ain't got who we wanted. Yeah,
they got, what was it, £100 million out of us for Varane and Casemiro, and they've now, looking at who's in there, Bellingham, Camavinga, Tchouaméni. That's what great clubs do. That's what clubs that are well run do. They get rid of the Casemiros at the right time, and they go out and get a Bellingham. That's what they do. And so both deals. I say, as you say, I think that Varane at 40 million or 38 million, whatever it was, He was 28, so that wasn't the worst thing.
No, not bad.
Unfortunately, his knees are about 50, but you know, he's doing okay still. But I think for the reasons we just talked about, I think, you know, I think to be paying £300,000 a week plus for players, albeit great players of that age, I think are examples of how you shouldn't be doing it in this day and age. Not with FFP certainly.
Just as a sort of more general thing, obviously you mentioned there's sort of areas that United are looking at, and I think, you know, it's obviously good stuff that United are seeing the problems and all that. But in terms of the actual strategy itself, there's been a lot of talk about Ten Hag having too much influence, almost to a man, except I think Casemiro. He's either played with or against, managed or, you know, played under every single person that he's brought in at United so far. Almost everyone. It's sort of all, like, freakish how some of the links, like Mason Mount trained at this place when he, like, it's crazy stuff. But basically, Ten Hag knows everyone he's brought in. On one hand, that makes sense because you don't want a manager having a load of players you don't like. And secondly, most crucially for me, why would I trust the people who've been making the transfers for the last 10 years to do any better than him? Because we've seen their track record, it's awful. So let the manager try. But going forward, we've got Omar Barada in as the new CEO. We've got Dave Brailsford as, I don't know his exact title, but he's very much in with Jim Ratcliffe. We've also got Jean-Clair Blanc, who's not usually on the talent side, but certainly in terms of building a brand and a style for a team. Then we've also got these vacant slots for a sporting director, and there's rumours of a head of recruitment coming in as well. Yeah. Do you think that Ten Hag will continue to have this influence? And if not, what do you think the pushback will be like? What will the dynamic be like in terms of who we get and who decides who we get? Yeah,
to answer your question, I'd say no. I think he's had far too much latitude under the current regime. I don't know how that's been allowed to happen.
I also think, and I know that I'm not blaming other people for what may be whatever that issue is, but you look at the track record and you look at the ability for people like John Murtough and Richard Arnold to say, you know what, no, I know better than you. Yeah. Well, what evidence have we got that you know better than Ten Hag? No. You know, that's the problem with everyone up until now, from the Glazers all the way down to John Murtough and the sort of the first step above the manager. What evidence and track record have you got to point to and say, I know more than you, Eric. I know you've won 3 Eredivises. I know you got to the semi-final of the Champions League, but I actually know more about football than you, so you're not having that guy. They can't say that. They've got no track record at all, most of them. No. Whereas now, you know, you look at Barada, what he's done at City, you look at the names being linked at the sporting director level and the chief recruitment level. They can go, actually, we know what we're doing, you coach, we will get better players than you can. Exactly. That's such a refreshing difference, isn't it? Like I feel like people are almost underestimating how big this shift could be with all these new people coming in. People who are actually good at their jobs, who have done it elsewhere. Like, what a novel theory. Like,
well, that's it. I mean, the phrase that you keep hearing with Ineos is best in class.
Yeah.
And Dave Brailsford is not a football man. You know, he openly accepts he comes from the world of like cycling, and all of that. But what he has got expertise in is best in class. That he oversees a system and a network of people that come in who do know their stuff, who are football experts. I think what's happened previously is there's been a bit of a vacuum where you've got owners that are over in the States whose main kind of focus is on the commercial side, what's coming in. You've had Richard Arnold and Ed Woodward, you know, 2 guys whose background are in banking and commerce, and you've had a fundamental lack of football knowledge, and that, I think, in this case is the reason why Eric has built up a certain power base.
Do you think there'll be pushback from Ten Hag on that? Because obviously there's pressures and there's opinions, and, you know, having a bit of freedom and a bit of power is a thing that people, you know, you look through history, people don't like giving up power for no reason.
Yeah.
Do you think that will be an issue for him?
Well, again, there are 2 issues here. One is, first and foremost, on the players that he signs. I think every manager would want to have as much say as possible. And let's wait and see. I think he will still keep his veto, as he's always had. Both sides have a veto. Both sides have a say in who gets signed. But, let's wait and see how much control he has over the signings. The other side of it, where it concerns Keys, Voss and SEG, as I say, I don't think he will push back too much on that, to be honest with you. But I think every manager, you know, if using Fergie as the ultimate example, if you succeed, if you win trophies, you build up a power base, you know, over time and over your successes. You build up, you build up the brownie points, where you're able to call the shots. Because people say, well, look, he's the guy. He's doing it here. Leave it to him. Just don't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But with Ten Hag, it's a little bit different. He's been there less than 2 seasons. First season, very good, overachieved. Not massively, but he overachieved. Second season, not been so good, and he is still on thin ice. Very interesting now this next few months. It's been a huge upturn the last few weeks. They're not, let's not forget, they've not beaten, anybody sensational. To go to Aston Villa on Sunday and win was great, probably the best of them yet. But it's going well. It's going a lot better. The team's picking up, injured players coming back. I think the whole Ineos thing has given the whole club a huge lift. And it would be great, I think, if Erik Ten Hag can get top 4, who knows, maybe even win a cup, then he may well still be the manager next season. But right here, right now, Joe, it's still up in the air. And so he needs to focus on the pitch, on what's happening there, rather than anything going forward in terms of the power base or his own agency.
I think that's almost a sort of a symbol of, to me, I don't want Ten Hag to leave by any means, but United need to have a constant through line that sort of a manager can come into and come off of without this huge interruption, and we sort of embed the manager so deeply into the workings of Man United that to get them out, you're sort of damaging everything around it. You have to sort of chisel them out. And almost a manager should be a part of a bigger system that is working regardless of who the coach is. Or you look, it pains me to say it, but you look at City, their last 3 managers have all won the league. That's never happened at Man United. No. That doesn't happen very often anywhere. No. And yet you look at City and they're doing that, and that needs to be where United are, where it's not working for Ten Hag, something's gone wrong, whatever. The next manager will win the league, and then the one after that will win the league. That's where United need to be, but obviously we're not there yet.
And that's where you go back to the point earlier about players and Troy and Girona and all the rest of it, is not only can you kind of groom players to come through a system, to come to your club, you can also groom managers. It doesn't always work, they obviously tried it with Vieira. Was he at New York, if I'm not mistaken, and then he went off to Sudan and then came to this country and didn't do so well. But they've also, their coaching ethos isn't just at one club; it goes throughout the entire group. So in effect, you're also grooming coaches. That the coach will come through, and who knows? Pep won't be there forever, and they're going to need somebody. And will they then pull in somebody of the same kind of standing in world football, or did they go to their own system and say, look, we've got a Pep Mark II right here?
Yeah, Barcelona did a lot of that, didn't they? There was a spell after Pep, actually, where you look at the manager and go, who's that? And yet they've won a treble, or they've won the league.
And that's where Pep came from. Pep was Barcelona B.
Exactly.
There was all this talk when they brought in Pep that they were going to go and get Jose. And they didn't go that route. They went and got Pep Guardiola. And people were like, wow, that's a massive, massive gamble. And of course, it paid off handsomely.
Right, great. Good to talk to you as always. Thank you very much for coming back on. Make sure you go and check out Chris at the Mail, and of course on Twitter and social media as well. Put the links to all of his stuff down there. Thank you for coming on, Chris, giving your insight, your information on all this stuff. Hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This has been a one-on-one interview. We'll see you in a bit.